Before Columbus set sail, long before the name America was ever spoken, there were other civilizations here, brilliant, refined, and far more profound than we once imagined. They left no written words, yet they left behind order, belief, and a rhythm of life so deeply in tune with nature that it became almost invisible. And perhaps it was that very harmony that caused them to be forgotten. Then the winds changed. As other worlds began to expand through sword and scripture, their civilizations faded quietly into silence. Not because they were weak, but because they had become one with the earth and with time itself, until no one could tell where humanity ended and nature began. Those who came later, Columbus, explorers, missionaries, saw only forests, plains, and what they called wilderness. They did not realize they were walking upon the remains of lost cities, places once illuminated by ritual and faith. And within that silence, the past drifted away, not destroyed, but simply forgotten. Tonight, on Bedtime History, we return to this land, to listen as the earth itself tells its story. Before the mountains had names, before humans ever drew a line between themselves and nature, North America was nothing but an endless expanse, wild, frozen, and full of mystery. Ice covered nearly half the continent, stretching from the Arctic all the way down to what is now the heart of the United States. Each winter seemed to last a century, and every breath of wind carried the echo of the Ice Age, an age when glaciers moved in silence, carving the veins of time across the earth. But the world was not always cold. Between the ages of frost and thaw came fleeting moments of warmth, brief, yet long enough for life to try and take hold. Mammoths wandered the plains, herds of bison thundered through the snow, and behind them a small human figure followed their tracks. These people had no names, no nations, no sense of borders. They were simply the first, the ones who crossed the boundary between nature and awareness, between survival and the beginning of history. From Siberia they crossed a vast land bridge that once connected two worlds, a place we now call Beringia. It was not merely a bridge of ice and grass, but a bridge of destiny. They carried with them fire, stone, and the memory of lands left behind. As the ice melted and the oceans rose, the bridge disappeared beneath the waves. But those who had crossed remained. They became the first seeds of humanity in North America. The world they entered was unforgiving. Cave lions, saber-toothed tigers, and towering bears ruled this land. Humans were fragile creatures among the giants of nature. Yet it was that very fragility that made them different. They learned to read the tracks in the snow, to listen to the wind, to respect and speak to the spirit of the animal they hunted. In the harshness of the climate and the solitude of endless nights, the first idea of soul and spirit was born, not from fear, but from gratitude and reverence. Then the seasons changed, the earth slowly warmed, and the glaciers retreated north, leaving behind fertile valleys and flowing rivers. Grass spread, forests rose, and small bands of people began to wander farther, spreading across the continent, from the Great Lakes to the Atlantic coast, from the Texas plains to the Nevada desert. They did not know they were discovering a new continent. They simply followed the herds, the sun, and the call of life itself. Each generation moved a little farther, pressing footprints into thin layers of ice, marks that would remain hidden for tens of thousands of years until humans uncovered them in the ancient earth. Those footprints, pressed into mud and ash between New Mexico and the Yukon, stand as undeniable proof that people were here long before history ever began to write. For centuries, scholars believed that the first humans arrived in North America about 13,000 years ago, the Clovis culture, named after its distinctive spear points found in New Mexico. But recent discoveries have shattered that belief. At Monteverde in Chile, wooden tools and traces of ancient fires date back nearly 18,000 years. At White Sands, New Mexico, human and child footprints lie side by side with those of mammoths dated to over 21,000 years ago. If true, that means they could not have simply come from north to south. They were already here before the ice even opened the way. The south to north hypothesis that the earliest humans might have appeared first in South America and gradually moved northward was once seen as impossible. Yet as caves in Brazil, Patagonia, and Mexico revealed artifacts older than Clovis, that impossibility began to look more like a forgotten truth. Perhaps there were many routes, not just through Beringia, but also along the Pacific coast, where small groups may have traveled by boat, hugging strips of land not yet swallowed by the sea. On the ancient geological map, the coastline looked nothing like it does today. Vast plains, now buried beneath the ocean, once stretched wide and dry, places where people may have camped, built fires, and watched the stars before the rising seas erased their world. Beneath the cold waves of the western shore, the remains of those first villages may still lie hidden, entombed in silence and sand. However they came, the first people did more than survive. They adapted. They learned to hunt giant beasts, to store food in the natural chill of ice, and to share fire as a sacred ritual of unity. And when the last bands of travelers finally crossed the final sheets of ice, they beheld something no human had ever seen before: endless plains, sparse forests, and great rivers flowing southward. There they stopped, lit their fires, and laid the first stones of community. Across the vast grasslands of the Great Plains, what we now call Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas, the first people began to learn how to live with nature rather than against it. They built their camps along rivers where herds of bison came to drink, and from there they organized great hunts. No longer solitary wanderers, they lived as communities, dividing roles among themselves: sentinels to watch the herds, craftsmen to shape tools, keepers of the fire, and gatherers of food. In the harsh winds and burning sun, a simple yet effective form of society quietly took shape. Their tools were symbols of adaptation. Long before the bow and arrow, they used the atlatl, a lever made of bone or wood that hurled spears twice as far and with far more force. The Folsom and Clovis spear points, crafted from sandstone and polished to a near-perfect edge capable of piercing a bison's thick hide, reveal an astonishing level of technical skill for a hunter-gatherer society. During migration season, dozens of hunters would surround entire herds, driving them toward natural cliff traps or marshy pits. At Lindenmeyer, the soil still bears the memory of those hunts: bison bones piled upon each other, broken spear tips, half-burned charcoal, frozen glimpses of a world both primitive and deeply organized. What truly kept them alive was unity. Within each camp, roles were clearly understood: the toolmaker, the lead hunter, the meat preserver, the caretaker of children. No laws were written, but everyone knew the code. They shared their food, divided hides for clothing, and passed the fire from hearth to hearth. In a land ruled by cold and drought, it was that sense of community that gave them strength, a form of early social cohesion that laid the groundwork for the tribal cultures that would one day define the plains. As centuries passed, the world grew warmer, the grasslands expanded, and the great herds moved with the seasons. The plains people followed, carrying their own language of marks and symbols, etched onto bone, stone, and wood, to trace their paths and hunting grounds. From makeshift camps they began to create semi-permanent settlements: wooden frames covered with animal hides, food storage pits, and stone hearths fixed in place. When they began to plant small patches of corn, squash and beans near their camps, they discovered something revolutionary, that the earth could sustain them longer than a single season. It was the quiet birth of agriculture, a small invention that would shape the destiny of humankind. The artifacts left behind at Folsom, Cooper's Ferry, and Lindenmeyer are more than tools. They are traces of structured thought, of strategy, of deliberate survival. In them, we see the first seeds of society, where humans no longer merely reacted to nature, but began to plan, to cooperate, and to remember. From those windswept plains, the foundation of North America's future cultures was laid, not in stone walls or written words, but in order, discipline, and the shared memory of a people. Amid the vast green plains of the American Midwest, where the Ohio and Mississippi rivers meet, a form of architecture, unlike anything else in the world, began to rise. Upon the flat, mirror-like earth, massive mounds of soil were built layer by layer, precisely measured, deliberately shaped into circles, squares, and graceful curves that seemed to follow the paths of the stars. This was no coincidence. Someone had measured, calculated, observed the heavens, and then transformed that celestial knowledge into the language of the land. When the first European explorers encountered the thousands of earthen mounds scattered across the Ohio Valley, they could only name their creators the mound builders. But behind that simple label lay a continuum of cultures spanning more than 2,000 years. The Adena people, beginning around 1,000 years before Christ, were the first to raise circular burial mounds. They chose sites near rivers, layering earth with charcoal, shells, and stone, as though each material represented one of the elements of their world: water, fire, earth, and air. Inside the Adena mounds, archaeologists have found human remains placed in fetal positions, accompanied by copper ornaments and carved stones, signs of a society already structured, ritualistic, and aware of hierarchy. From this foundation, around 200 years before Christ, the Hopewell culture blossomed. They were master architects of earth. Their geometric earthwork stretched for hundreds of meters, aligned with perfect right angles, often oriented toward the rising sun or the brightest constellations of the season. Some of their circular formations matched the lunar cycle in circumference, evidence of an astronomical understanding far beyond what Europeans once believed primitive peoples could possess. They left behind intricate artifacts, copper ornaments, fine pottery, obsidian blades, and seashells carried from the distant Gulf Coast, revealing a vast network of trade spanning thousands of kilometers. The Hopewell understood that knowledge itself was power, and that to align one's world with the sky was to bring order to the earth. There is no evidence that the Hopewell built cities or empires. Instead, they seem to have been a network of communities united by a single philosophy, that humanity exists within the great turning of the cosmos, and that the earth can be written as a reflection of the heavens. In this world, science and spirituality were one. Ritual was also mathematics. When the sun rose precisely on the solstice horizon, and its rays passed through the centers of two earthen circles, it was not merely an event. It was a moment when humanity felt perfectly placed within the cosmic order. Today the mounds of the Adena and Hopewell appear only as gentle ripples across the fields, yet they remain the opening lines of a new chapter in North American history. From Hopewell's star-measuring wisdom, greater centers would one day emerge. Places where the earth no longer only mirrored the sky, but became a symbol of power, ceremony, and civilization. And at the heart of that path, one place would rise above them all, a great city of earth, where the order of the cosmos was transformed into the order of humankind. Around the year 1050 after Christ, at the confluence of the Mississippi, Missouri, and Illinois rivers, a city of earth rose, a metropolis larger than any other in North America at the time. Cahokia, the name later given to it, spanned more than 13 square kilometers and was crowned with hundreds of hand-built earthen mounds. At its height, the city may have held between 20,000 and 40,000 people, more than London or Paris in the same era. From every direction they came, from the Great Lakes, from the Ohio Valley, even from the distant shores of the Gulf of Mexico. Cahokia was not merely a place to live, it was a center of ceremony, trade, and power, the beating heart of the Mississippian world. At its core stood Monk's Mound, a colossal pyramid of earth rising about 30 meters high, stretching more than 300 meters in length and nearly 240 in width, built from over 700,000 cubic meters of soil. Each layer was a page in time, a record of expansion, of ritual, of power declared. Upon its summit stood the palace or temple of the great sun, the supreme ruler believed to be the living embodiment of the sun itself. Each dawn, the first light pierced straight across the central plaza and climbed the mound's peak, transforming the entire city into a vast clock measuring the pulse of the cosmos. Surrounding Monk's Mound were more than 120 others, conical, pyramidal, and flat-topped, arranged along precise north-south and east-west axes, so accurate that even modern engineers stand in awe. On the western edge stood Woodhenge, a great solar circle of 48 red cedar posts, 125 meters in diameter, used to mark the solstices and equinoxes. When the sun rose on the summer solstice, the shadow of the central post aligned perfectly with the temple of the great sun, proof of a refined astronomical knowledge and a belief that the order of heaven must be reflected upon the order of the earth. Cahokia's economy was no less sophisticated. Canoes glided along the Mississippi carrying copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf Coast, obsidian from the Rocky Mountains, and turquoise from the far southwest. In the bustling central marketplace, these goods were exchanged alongside food, pottery, and ritual offerings. In this way, Cahokia became the crossroads of a trade network spanning more than 2,000 kilometers, a testament that the indigenous peoples of the Americas had built an interconnected economy long before Columbus set sail. Yet behind this prosperity lay a sacred order, woven from ritual. At sunrise, thousands gathered around the great plaza, all facing the peak of Monk's Mound. Priests lifted polished copper sheets to catch the first rays of dawn. Below them, white shells reflected the glow of fire, shimmering like water. Light danced across metal, across waves, across thousands of silent faces, a single moment where humanity, earth, and sky breathed together as one. Everything in their world moved in cycles. Fire met water, day followed night, the old season yielded to the new. Time to them was not a river, but a circle. When they planted seeds, lit fires, or buried the dead, they believed they were mirroring the movements of the universe itself, a ceremony in which the cosmos was both witness and participant. And when night returned, after the drums quieted and the incense faded, they looked upward. The sky stretched black and vast, jeweled with stars, and across that darkness the Milky Way curved like a great serpent of light, its body winding, coiling, gliding across the heavens. It swallowed the moon and released the sun, continuing the eternal ritual that humankind had just performed upon the earth below. In their eyes, that serpent was more than an image. It was the spirit of the cycle itself, the guardian of the gate between earth and sky, between life and death. And from the mounds of Cahokia, that belief spread outward, becoming the legend of the sky serpent, a symbol of the endless motion of the world, of the turning circle that no one could ever stop. Ancient Choctaw legends tell that the world was once covered by water. When the sky serpent stirred, the land rose and became the continents. The Creek believed that when it grew angry, storms and floods would come, drowning the earth. For the Cherokee, the sky serpent was the living soul of the Milky Way, a being of creation and destruction, forever maintaining balance between opposing forces. Elsewhere it was called Uktena, the horned serpent, said to dwell both in deep rivers and in the night sky, revealing itself only when the world fell into disorder. In indigenous art, the serpent's form appears everywhere, carved in stone, cast in copper, etched onto ancient amulets. Its eyes mirror the sun, its body coils in 7 bends, sometimes merging with wings like those of a bird, all reflecting a belief that sky and earth are one continuous being. During sacred ceremonies, shamans wore serpent-shaped necklaces, symbols of their power to cross the threshold between the seen and unseen worlds. In rituals of planting and harvest, the serpent represented the river itself, the flowing lifeblood of the land. What is astonishing is how universal this image became. From the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, from Florida to Kentucky, the sky serpent appears again and again, passed down across millennia as a shared language, perhaps born in the time of the Hopewell and carried forward through generations like an engraving upon the human soul. To them, the serpent was not a god, but the rhythm of the cosmos itself, a heartbeat that humankind could only listen to, never control. Imagine a summer night thousands of years ago. A shaman stands atop a mound, torch in hand, his voice a low chant rising into the wind. Below him the villagers stand in silence, gazing upward. The Milky Way glows bright across the sky, curving and twisting like a luminous serpent. In that moment, all of them feel the same thing, that they are alive within the very pulse of the universe. Today, as archaeologists and anthropologists trace the serpent's path across the continent, they marvel at an inexplicable unity. Hundreds of different peoples, separated by vast distances, all drawn to a single vision, the serpent of the sky. And perhaps that is why, in the rolling hills of southern Ohio, where those legends converge, there exists a place where humans carved the sky serpent not into memory, but into the living earth itself. On a gentle ridge overlooking the valley of Brush Creek, it lies coiled, nearly half a kilometer long, its body bending in 7 graceful curves, its open mouth poised as if to swallow a great earthen moon. Modern people call it the Great Serpent Mound, but for those who once lived upon this land, it was more than a monument. It was a prayer carved into the earth, a message written to the sky. From above, its form is astonishingly precise, as if guided by the heavens themselves. The serpent's head faces the setting point of the summer solstice. Its curving coils align with the rising and setting of the sun during the spring and autumn equinoxes, as well as with the moon's most extreme cycles. Though built more than 1,000 years ago, its creators clearly understood the movements of the sky and transformed that celestial knowledge into form upon the ground. The question of who built it still has no single answer. Beneath its soil, archaeologists have uncovered layers of ash and pottery belonging to different ages. Carbon-14 analysis suggests that the mound's base dates to the Adena culture, around 1,000 to 300 years before Christ, while the upper layers, containing Fort ancient pottery, belong to the 11th century after Christ. Perhaps the Fort ancient people reused or expanded an older sacred site, a chain of generations adding to the same shape, turning it into a collective inheritance that spanned over 2,000 years. Whoever its builders were, the Serpent Mound remains a testament to astonishing skill in both engineering and astronomy. Without stone or mortar, it was formed from thousands of tons of earth, piled, packed, and sculpted, with a height variation of less than a single meter across its entire length. The serpent's body follows the natural ridge of the hill, creating the illusion of motion as moonlight slides across it at night. Each curve seems designed to catch the shadows of celestial light, a cosmic calendar that could be read not by words, but by sight. Its meaning is still debated. Some scholars see it as an agricultural observatory used to mark the rhythms of planting and harvest. Others believe it was a celestial memorial commemorating the passage of a comet or an ancient eclipse. Yet whatever its purpose, it reveals something profound, that ancient people did not need writing to record time. They wrote it in shape, in light, in earth itself. After the Serpent Mound, earthen structures of symmetry and alignment began to appear throughout the northeast, circles, causeways, and geometric formations precisely oriented to the sun and moon. From this great serpent, the idea of cosmic form seems to have taken root, a sacred model through which later circle builders continued the language of the heavens, transforming astronomy, ritual, and order into the architecture of belief. For the ancient peoples of northeastern America, the world was never just the ground beneath their feet. Every breath, every life, every death was part of a sacred order, a universe divided into two halves, the realm of light and the realm of shadow. The sun was the eye of the sky spirit, illuminating the upper world. Beneath the soil lay another domain, deep, damp, and filled with mystery, where souls dwelled after leaving the body. Between these two realms, humanity existed as a traveler, forever walking the threshold between light and darkness, between waking and dreaming, between life and death. At the heart of their belief was the sun, the supreme source of life, symbol of order, power, and rebirth. Each dawn was a new creation of the world, each sunset the opening of the gate to the underworld. The ancient shamans taught that the sun never truly died, it merely journeyed beneath the earth, carrying light into the world of shadows, and returned with the coming of morning. This eternal cycle shaped their faith in resurrection. Death was not an ending, but a return. The great earthen mounds of the Adena, Hopewell, and Mississippian cultures all reflect this worldview. Many were aligned east to west, mirroring the sun's path across the sky. Some were built in two levels, the upper for the living, the lower for the dead, where the soul began its descent into the underworld. When the deceased were buried, they were often laid on their sides facing east, as though waiting for the first light of the new day to awaken them. During funerary rites, the living did not wail, they sang. Their songs were said to guide the soul through darkness, like a canoe drifting down the river of night. This dual faith was also bound to the rhythm of the seasons. In spring, when the earth opened and green returned, the sun triumphed over darkness. In winter, when the light grew weak and the soil turned cold, the underworld reigned. The great summer solstice festivals, where people danced around fires, arms raised to the sky, were not mere celebrations of harvest, but rituals to preserve cosmic balance, to ensure that light would return after the season of darkness. Some legends say that the world beneath was not only home to the dead, but also to luminous deities, fiery spirits who guarded the waters and the veins of the earth. Rivers, caves, and deep wells were seen as gates to the underworld. Shamans conducting rites often wore masks painted half gold and half black, one side radiant like the sun, the other dark as night, symbols of the balance humanity must maintain. For if one force ever triumphed over the other, the world would fall into chaos, drought or flood, famine or despair. In Mississippian art, the hawk, symbol of the sky, often appears beside the serpent, symbol of the earth. They were not enemies, but counterparts. The hawk carried souls upward, the serpent guided them below. Between them stood humanity, the only creature born of the earth yet able to gaze toward the heavens. From this awareness grew a profound philosophy that both worlds must be honored, for light cannot exist without shadow, and life cannot endure without bowing to death. Standing between sun and soil, between light and darkness, ancient people found their place in the cosmos. They no longer lived by instinct alone. They sought to move in harmony with the rhythm of the sky. To them, the sun was not just a source of light, but the heartbeat of the world, and darkness was not destruction, but the place where all beginnings and all returns were born. From this understanding, they built their strange and sacred monuments, circles of earth, of light, and of faith, where astronomy and ritual became one, as if humankind and the heavens were breathing together. Across the misty fields of the Ohio and Scioto river valleys, vast earthen circles still lie hidden beneath modern farmland and quiet neighborhoods. They are so geometrically perfect that one might mistake them for the work of modern surveyors, yet they have been there for more than 2,000 years, shaped by hands that knew no writing, only the language of wind, shadow, and the turning of the sun. People today call them the circle builders, the ones who turned earth into calendar, ritual, and prayer all at once. Their creations stretch across central Ohio, circles, squares, and ellipses connected by long earthen avenues that flow like celestial axes. At Newark, the earthworks complex covers more than 5 square kilometers, featuring a massive circular enclosure nearly 360 meters wide, joined to a perfect square 280 meters across by a straight causeway almost 600 meters long. In the Scioto Valley, similar formations form a great network aligned along the east-west horizon, as if the entire landscape itself were one enormous observatory. When archaeologists reconstructed these sites using LIDAR technology, they discovered astonishing precision. At the summer solstice, sunrise light shines directly down the narrow earthen passage to the center of the circle. At the winter solstice, sunset falls exactly along the opposite line. Modern measurements reveal a margin of error of less than half a degree, a level of accuracy almost inconceivable for a society without metal, compasses, or wheels. For them, the sky was the clock, and the earth was its hand. But these circles were not built merely to watch the heavens. They were ceremonial stages where humankind met the cosmos. When the sun rose at the perfect angle, drums echoed across the fields, and hundreds of people stepped into the circle, walking in rhythm around its center. They did not see it as worship, but as alignment, a way to tune themselves to the rhythm of the world. Seasons, hunts, birth, and death all followed the same orbit of light. Knowledge for them did not live in books, but in motion. What is most mysterious is the consistency. At every site, Newark, Chillicothe, High Bank Works, the same proportions, angles, and combinations of circle and square appear again and again. Geometry, it seems, was not an art, but a faith. The circle symbolized the heavens, the square, the earth, and where the two forms met was the gateway, the point where human and divine worlds touched. Within these patterns lies a quiet philosophy, that the order of the universe could be rebuilt by human hands, through earth, through ritual, through the belief in the perfect repetition of time. Though many of their works were ploughed under, forgotten, or destroyed over centuries, the outlines of their circles still remain faintly beneath the soil, enduring shadows in the memory of the land itself. And from this ground, the idea of order and cycle would take new shape, growing into a society where astronomy, faith, and power would merge into one. A new order that measured not only the heavens, but humanity itself, according to the same divine rhythm, the Mississippian order. Along the broad, winding waters of the Mississippi, from Illinois to Alabama, a new civilization rose from the legacy of the circle builders. No longer small riverside communities, These were planned cities where politics, religion, and economy flowed together as one. They are known today as the Mississippians, the people of the river. The great river did more than feed them. It shaped their very soul, layered, fluid, and cyclical, just like its current. Between the years 800 and 1500 after Christ, hundreds of ceremonial centers appeared along the river's course. Each was a self-contained world, organized around a central plaza and crowned with flat-topped pyramid mounds that held temples, the homes of rulers, or ritual spaces. Around them spread the homes of the people, storehouses of corn, and intricate canals that guided the flow of water. From above, their cities resembled sacred networks, with every path leading toward the heart, where the sun was worshipped and order was maintained. This was the first society in North America to clearly define social classes. At the summit stood the great sun, both a political leader and a divine representative of the gods. Beneath him were nobles, priests, warriors, commoners, and slaves. This hierarchy was not imposed by law, but seen as a reflection of the cosmos, the sun above, the earth between, and the world below, where souls returned. No written code was needed. Belief in the cosmic cycle was the law itself. The Mississippians ruled not by force, but through ceremony. When the sun reached its zenith, the people gathered in the plaza. Priests burned incense, and the ruler appeared cloaked in feathers, his face painted red and black, the colors of day and night, of life and death. Together they reenacted the sun's journey across the sky, reminding all that the order of the universe and the order of society were one and the same. In that moment, thousands knelt toward the east, the direction of returning light, as if breathing in unison with the heavens. Behind these rituals lay a sophisticated and interconnected economy. The Mississippi served as the continent's great artery. Copper from the Great Lakes, flint from the Ozarks, shells and turquoise from the Gulf, all flowed into great centers such as Etowah, Moundville, and Spiro. The Mississippians developed advanced agriculture, cultivating corn, squash, and beans in harmony with the sun's cycle. They built dikes, terraces, and irrigation canals to tame the river's floods and feed their people. They knew that if the harvest failed, the ritual would lose its meaning, and if the ritual faded, humanity would forget how to give thanks to the earth. Their art expressed this same philosophy. On pottery and ceremonial masks, serpents coil around hawks, humans transform into gods, and gods take human form. Red and black, their dominant colors, symbolized the dual forces of nature, not in conflict, but in balance. These were not decorations, but texts in clay, records of cosmic law written by hands that had no alphabet. The Mississippians did not create beauty for beauty's sake. They created to remember. Every pattern was a prayer, every vessel a map of the sacred order. Each hand that carved clay affirmed the same truth. The universe required humanity to keep rhythm, through labor, through ceremony, through gratitude to the sun, the earth, and the waters. And through the river all things moved. Offerings, beads, copper, and shells drifted downstream like messages of a living faith. The Mississippi became more than a trade route. It was a spiritual artery, where commerce was ritual, and exchange was the way humanity extended the order of the cosmos across the face of the earth. The Mississippi River, something no one could own and nothing could destroy, kept the Mississippian legacy in motion. From the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, from Missouri to Alabama, this ancient network of trade flowed like the circulatory system of the earth itself. If Cahokia was the beating heart of the civilization, then the trade routes were its veins, carrying matter, meaning, and spirit together. Every grain of copper, every seashell, every wooden canoe was a message of connection. From the warm southern seas, cypress boats carried shells, pearls, coral, and red dye northward along the Gulf Coast and up the river. Far to the north, around Lake Superior, ancient miners extracted red copper with stone hammers, metal believed to be the blood of Mother Earth. When these two worlds met, an exchange took shape: copper for shell, flint for pottery, goods for ceremony. There was no currency, no contract, only promise and trust. Trade required no written law, for it was governed by belief that giving was a way of keeping the universe in balance. The rivers became the great highways of ancient North America. The Mississippi, Ohio, Tennessee, and Missouri linked together to form one of the most powerful natural transport networks in the ancient world. Along these waters, goods traveled with languages, rituals, and stories. From the south came pearls and Gulf shells. From the north, copper, chert, and rare feathers. Artifacts from the Appalachians and even the Rocky Mountains have been found in burial mounds across Illinois and Tennessee, evidence of an invisible highway that connected the continent thousands of years before Columbus. River markets were the centers of social life. Traders met shamans, potters met hunters, and rituals mingled with commerce. Trade was not only the exchange of goods, it was the exchange of ideas, an invisible web of spiritual and cultural flow. A carved wooden mask from Florida would appear as far north as Wisconsin. A shell etched with the serpent and hawk motif of the Gulf would rest in a noble's grave in Ohio. These objects were not merely traded, they were carried like talismans, like promises that the universe remained united by unseen currents. Maintaining such a network was no easy task. Each season, the river shifted its course. Traders had to learn to read the stars, the wind, and the song of the current. Without maps, they navigated by memory and symbol. Carvings on pottery, bone or shell, served as the language of trade, each spiral or engraved line a sign of a tribe, a greeting, or a pledge of safety. In a world without writing, commerce became the first universal language. Today, archaeology has retraced those ancient roots. In Illinois, shells from the Caribbean have been unearthed. In Tennessee, copper from Lake Superior. In Florida, obsidian from Mexico. These artifacts traveled thousands of kilometers, crossing the lands of countless peoples, yet they bear shared markings, a silent testament that trade was the bridge between culture and faith. For the Mississippians, trade was not merely survival, it was equilibrium. They believed exchange was the law of nature. Rivers flow to the sea and rain returns to the land. People give and receive to preserve harmony. During harvest festivals, they offered foreign treasures to the gods, a southern shell, a northern shard of copper, as proof that the world still moved in balance. And when those offerings were placed into the hands of the dead, their journey did not end, for to them trade did not merely link lands but connected the two worlds themselves. In the world of the Mississippians there was no gold or silver, yet two sacred materials held a power greater than any precious metal, copper and shell. One gleamed like fire, symbolizing the sun and authority. The other shone pale as mist, symbolizing water and the soul. Between them, people saw the balance of the universe, between male and female, sky and earth, life and death. And from that belief, copper and shell became the twin symbols of religion, order, and the human yearning to cross the boundary between worlds. Their origins lay far apart. In the cold caves around Lake Superior, ancient miners had worked some of the oldest copper mines on Earth, traces of fire and stone hammers still etched into the walls. The rough copper was separated by fire and quenched by water, then beaten until it glowed like dawn. The Mississippians believed copper was the breath of Mother Earth, a substance transformed only by sacred flame and therefore filled with the power of the heavens. Each sheet of copper was not mere wealth, but a mirror of the cosmos, sunlight trapped within metal. Upon those shining sheets, artisans carved images of hawks, masked figures, and serpents coiling around discs, not for decoration, but to retell sacred stories. Many such artifacts were found in noble tombs, copper plates placed upon the chest of the dead, beside shells, feathers, and stones, offerings for the soul's passage through the gate of the underworld. To them, the metal did not die with the body, it guided the light back to the sky. Shells, the remnants of the sea, came from the distant Gulf of Mexico, traveling thousands of kilometers upriver. When they reached the great centers, artisans shaped and polished them into necklaces, pendants, and ceremonial bowls. On their gleaming surfaces they carved suns, hawks, and waves, the symbols of life and rebirth. In ritual, shells held sacred water, poured over the soil during planting, or used by priests to cleanse their hands before ceremony. Shells were the voice of water, the element that linked humankind to the underworld, where all things begin. The two sacred materials often appeared together in the ritual of sun and water. When light struck a copper plate and reflected onto a white shell, it marked the moment when two worlds met. The shaman lifted both high, praying for harmony, rain and wind, fertile harvests, and the safe rebirth of the departed. In the tombs of chiefs, copper and shell always rested side by side, the balance of the cosmos made visible, fire and water, heaven and earth, life and death in perfect accord. Yet copper and shell also revealed the hierarchy of their world. Only the chosen could wear copper or possess shell. They were marks of status, symbols of loyalty. When a ruler gifted a copper plate or a string of shells, it was not a simple offering, it was a covenant, sometimes a treaty between tribes. A small copper sheet could represent peace, a chain of white shells could sanctify marriage or alliance. As time passed and the trade routes weakened, copper and shell became scarce. Without their sacred materials, the rituals faltered. People tried to replace them with clay or bone, but nothing reflected light like metal or sea. The sun lost its mirror, and water lost its voice. And when the last copper plates were buried with the dead, an era ended, the age when the world's balance was kept through the union of fire and water. Yet from those ashes a new order took root. In the south, where the Tennessee and Alabama rivers meet the sea, small chiefdoms began reviving the old rites in their own ways, not empires, but flexible kingdoms bound by marriage, warfare, and ceremony. Their rulers still wore feathered crowns, still worshipped the sun, but among forests and plains, they had learned to live closer to the earth. They came to be known as the Southern Kingdoms, the native chiefdoms of the American South, stretching from Georgia to Alabama, from Mississippi to Florida. Here, the spirit of the Mississippian world still breathed, not as bright as before, but deep, steady, and enduring like the slow pulse of a heart that had survived the storm. Amid the oak forests and open fields, these kingdoms preserved the echoes of the old order. At the center of every community rose an earthen mound, part temple, part palace, part emblem of power. Atop it sat the ruler, not merely a chief, but one believed to carry the spirit of the divine. They bore many titles, great son among the Natchez, Miko among the Creek, and chief priest among the Choctaw. Below them were nobles, priests, warriors, and commoners, a smaller, more adaptable reflection of the Mississippian hierarchy, reshaped by time and necessity. What sustained these kingdoms was not military might, but alliance and ritual. Bonds between tribes were woven through marriage, through the exchange of sacred objects, and through oaths carved upon white shells. The Creek allied with the Yuchi, the Choctaw traded with the Chickasaw, and the Natchez, the closest heirs of the ancient Mississippian heartland, continued to worship the sun, believing their ruler to be the child of light itself. When war came, they carried not only weapons but the symbols of their gods, for to them battle was also ceremony, a sacred test of balance. One remarkable feature of the southern kingdoms was their matrilineal rule. In many nations, power did not pass from father to son, but from a ruler to his sister's child, the female line seen as the true source of life, fertility, and renewal. In their world, woman was the vessel of the divine, the living earth from which both gods and people were born. Through this system, power never stagnated. It flowed, cycling like the setting and rising sun, like the turn of dry and wet seasons. That rhythm of rotation made their societies resilient, firm, yet flexible against the chaos of change. Confederate councils were still held along the banks of the Alabama and Apalachicola rivers. Elders sat around the fire, smoking the peace pipe, speaking of harvests, disputes, and the bonds between nations. There were no thrones, no written laws, only consensus. Order endured through memory and ceremony, through the retelling of old stories about the sun and the waters, reminding all that true authority came not from man, but from nature itself. Yet beneath this calm surface, cracks began to spread. The climate shifted, the rains came late, the soil grew dry. Forests were cut for timber, charcoal, and construction. As the earth weakened, so did trust among the tribes. Small disputes turned to holy wars, each people convinced that only their God could restore balance to the world. Meanwhile, the Mississippi shifted its course, trade routes collapsed, and Cahokia, the old symbol of cosmic order, fell into silence. And yet, even amid crisis, one thing never changed. The southern kingdoms never separated faith from power. Every council, every festival, every battle began with a prayer to the sun. When a ruler died, he was not simply buried with sacred objects. His temple atop the mound was set aflame, sending his spirit skyward. It was not death, but a rite of renewal, power, leaving the flesh to rejoin the eternal cycle as if the universe itself were beginning again. And then, around the year 1300 after Christ, the flame went out. Cahokia, once home to tens of thousands, a city built from earth and faith, became, within just a few generations, an empty field. Wind and grass reclaimed the sacred mounds where temples to the sun once stood. The ceremonial avenues vanished beneath layers of silt. The great plazas where thousands once gathered now survive only as the silent shadows of memory. For centuries, archaeologists have asked the same haunting question. What happened to Cahokia, to a civilization that once touched the light of the divine, only to sink into the darkness of forgetting? There was a time when this city embodied the cosmic order, where humans lived in rhythm with the sun, the soil, the water, and ritual. But that very greatness became the seed of its fall. The population swelled beyond what the land could feed. Forests were stripped bare for wood, to build homes, to fire pottery, to raise the towering mounds. The earth cracked, the river changed course, the waters dried, and then came floods. Nature, once their sacred ally, began to turn against them. Some scientists believe climate change was the chief cause. In the late 13th century, the Earth entered a brief cooling phase now known as the Little Ice Age. Harvests failed, rainfall shifted, and the Mississippi rose unpredictably, sweeping away fields. Farmers who once trusted the gods to protect their crops began to doubt. When rituals no longer brought rain, faith began to crumble. The rulers lost their divine authority. The social order dissolved like layers of soil carried off by the flood. Others suggest Cahokia collapsed from within. As the ruling class grew distant from the people, ceremonies turned hollow, and citizens began to leave. Archaeological evidence tells of growing unrest, human bones bearing marks of violence, homes burned, temples abandoned. Some mounds were left unfinished, as if their builders had walked away mid-construction, or simply lost the will to continue. Perhaps it was belief itself, the very force that once bound the city together, that was the first to die. When modern archaeologists unearthed its remains, they found traces not of destruction, but of departure. There were no mass graves, no toppled walls, only new layers of soil gently covering the old. It was as though the people of Cahokia knew their time had ended and chose to leave in silence, offering their city back to the earth as a message to those who would come after. After Cahokia fell silent beneath the soil, something strange happened. The rivers still flowed, the forest still breathed, the birds still returned with the seasons. Yet the people began to move. It was not an exodus of panic, but a quiet migration. They did not vanish, they dispersed like seeds carried by the wind, scattering the memory of the Sun City across the continent. From Illinois down to Tennessee, from the Ohio Valley to the shores of Florida, groups of people carried fragments of Cahokia's culture, its symbols, and its spirit, giving rise to those we now call the wandering tribes. They did not travel as armies, but as families. Some followed the rivers, others the trails of the herds, and some simply walked eastward, toward the sunrise where they believed their ancestors had once come from. With each step, they carried small sacred things: a piece of pottery, a copper amulet etched with a hawk, a handful of ash from an old mound. These were not mere keepsakes, but vessels of memory. To them, leaving Cahokia was not abandoning home, it was carrying its soul forward. They blended into the landscape, building new camps by rivers, lighting fires on unfamiliar soil, and retelling old stories to their children. Over generations, those stories ceased to be history and became legend, tales of the hill where the sun sleeps, of the giant who lifted the earth toward the sky, of the serpent as long as summer. Slowly, memory became myth, and myth became identity. Later, ethnographers would notice striking similarities among the tribes of the eastern and southern woodlands, the same symbols repeating across vast distances: serpents, birds, and circles. The Creek people still held the green corn ceremony, a harvest ritual that descended directly from Mississippian agricultural rites. The Natchez still called their ruler the Great Sun and worshipped the sun as the supreme deity. The Cherokees still spoke of the mound builders who vanished westward, leaving footprints in the forest. It seemed that the memory of Cahokia had never truly died. It had simply changed its name, its tongue, and lived on in the hearts of the wanderers. In their world, the past was never severed. There was no before and after, as in European history, but a great circle of time where ancestors, descendants, and spirits all coexisted within the same sacred space. When elders told stories, they did not begin with long ago, but with when the world was young. In those words still echoes Cahokia's belief that life always returns, that no matter how far humanity travels, it remains within the eternal rhythm of earth and sky. Some went even farther, crossing the Appalachian Mountains to reach the Atlantic coast. There they met other peoples, trading, marrying, and blending. From these crossings, new cultures were born: the Powhatan of Virginia, the Timucua of Florida, distant heirs of the Mississippian flow. They no longer remembered the name Cahokia, but they still honored the sun, the spirit realms, and the cycles of birth, death, and renewal. The memory of a vanished city had become cultural DNA, passed through blood, through song, through tattoo and dance, an echo of a civilization that once burned bright, then dissolved into the living memory of the ocean's edge. And it was there, along that coastline, where the memory of the Mississippians mingled with the sound of the waves, that another chapter of history began. Since the first European ships landed in the 15th century, the story has always been told that Columbus was the man who united the Old World with the New. But what if that was not entirely true? What if, centuries or even millennia before him, others had already crossed the sea, touched this continent, and then vanished like shadows upon the waves? The idea of pre-Columbian contact is not a modern fantasy, but a theory grounded in evidence, and among all possibilities, one case stands firm. The Norse, the seafarers of the north, descendants of people who lived between ice, wind, and a restless ocean. Their story begins in the sagas, the old Icelandic chronicles that recount the voyages of Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red. Around the year 1000 after Christ, he left Greenland, blown off course by the wind, and came upon a land of forests, fish, and green meadows. They called it Vinland, the land of wine. They built houses, hunted, explored, and for a brief moment believed they had found a new world. For centuries, the story was dismissed as legend until 1960, when two Norwegian archaeologists, Helge and Anne Steen Ingstad, excavated Lanso Meadows in Newfoundland. Beneath the frozen ground, they uncovered 8 long wooden houses, stone hearths, a forge, and iron ship nails crafted on site. Radiocarbon dating placed them between the years 1000 and 1020, more than 4 centuries before Columbus ever set sail. It was undeniable proof the Vikings had crossed the Atlantic and set foot in the Americas. They stayed only a short while, long enough to work iron, repair ships, and perhaps trade with the local people the sagas called the Skraelings, likely ancestors of the Beothuk. But the encounters soon turned violent. The chronicles describe exchanges of furs and milk, followed by clashes that forced the Norse to retreat to Greenland. Vinland, whether because of harsh weather, sparse population, or simply the absence of gold, never became the promised land they hoped for. They departed, leaving their silent wooden dwellings behind, swallowed by mist. Yet one question remains: where exactly was Vinland? The sagas speak of 3 lands: Helluland, the land of stone, likely Baffin Island; Markland, the land of forests, possibly Labrador; and Vinland, a place where wild grapes grew naturally, perhaps as far south as Nova Scotia or even New England. If true, the Vikings travelled much farther than the single known site suggests. Even today, driftwood samples, rusted iron tools, and traces of ancient campfires continue to surface along the North Atlantic coast, like fragments of waves left behind by their voyage. The Vikings may have departed, but they left behind the first confirmed European footprints on American soil, a timeless reminder that the ocean has never been a wall, but a bridge between worlds thought forever apart. But the Vikings were not the only possibility. On the far side of the Atlantic, scholars as early as the 19th century began to ask a daring question. Could the Phoenicians, the master mariners of the ancient Mediterranean, have crossed the ocean 3,000 years ago? These were the same traders who sailed beyond the Pillars of Hercules, reached the western shores of Africa, and carried their goods, their script, and their stone tablets engraved with the god Baal. Some amateur archaeologists have claimed that strange inscriptions found in the Americas, such as the Los Lunas Decalogue stone in New Mexico, bear traces of Phoenician writing. Most scholars dismiss such findings as coincidence, yet the idea that a seafaring civilization might have crossed the Atlantic before Rome even existed still lingers like a riddle. If they came, what did they see, and why did no one remember? Then came the Polynesians, the unmatched voyagers of the Pacific. They once navigated thousands of miles, linking islands from Hawaii to New Zealand using nothing but stars, swells, and wind. Archaeological evidence confirms that they reached the coasts of South America, exchanging sweet potatoes and chickens with native peoples long before European contact. Could it not be possible, then, that their double-hulled canoes, light, strong, and astonishingly seaworthy, had also touched the shores of ancient California or Mexico? Some Polynesian legends speak of a far eastern land where the sun rises from the sea, perhaps a fading memory of the American continent itself. Even bolder theories suggest that the Egyptians, the Celts, and even the Chinese during the voyages of Zheng He might have sailed farther than history records. Roman coins have been found in Maine and Georgia, inscribed stones in Oklahoma, ceramic figurines in Mexico bearing African features. Each discovery raises the same unsettling question. Are these coincidences, or the forgotten remains of journeys that slipped through the cracks of recorded history? Perhaps even more intriguing are the echoes in the oral traditions of the native peoples themselves. The Iroquois tell of great boats as large as mountains that moved without wind. The Choctaw speak of red-haired people who came from the east and then vanished. The Navajo remember that our ancestors once saw the masts of the sun rising from the sea. These accounts, faint yet enduring, have survived across centuries, like the distant echo of a memory left out of official chronicles. Maybe what matters is not who came first, but that they may have met at all. The ocean, rather than a wall, may once have been a bridge between worlds. The Gulf Stream flows directly from West Africa to the Caribbean. The Pacific trade winds could easily have carried Polynesian vessels toward California. When we stop seeing the sea as a barrier and start seeing it as a road, the ancient world suddenly feels different, wider, more fluid, and far more connected than we ever imagined. Perhaps long ago civilizations we think of as isolated, Egypt and Mesoamerica, Phoenicia and Polynesia, once gazed upon the same horizon, their ships crossing beneath the same sun before both vanished into the mist of time. And sometimes history does not leave only waves behind, it leaves marks. For if the sea is the path of memory, then the land is where that memory is carved into stone. Scattered across North America, among the mossy woods of the Appalachians, on granite hills in Minnesota, and across the dry deserts of New Mexico, stand stones carved with strange markings. Their letters belong to no known native tongue, nor do they fit neatly into the alphabets of Europe. It is as if, in the dim mist of forgotten centuries, other travelers once set foot here, leaving their messages in stone before vanishing back into the sea. Real or forged, accidental or deliberate, they endure, these stubborn stones, standing against time and doubt, forcing us to wonder whether the history of America has been rewritten more than once. Among the most famous is the Kensington Rune Stone, unearthed in 1898 in Minnesota by a Swedish farmer named Olof Oman. On its 90-kilogram granite face is a runic inscription describing a group of 8 Swedes and 22 Norwegians on an expedition in 1362. It tells of men who travelled from Vinland to the west, camped beside a lake, and lost 10 of their number, killed by the natives. The message ends with a plea, a VM, save us from evil. Ave Maria, save us from evil. If authentic, it would mean Norse explorers returned to the continent 4 centuries after Leif Erikson, but scholars remain divided. Many dismiss it as a 19th century hoax crafted by Scandinavian settlers seeking to honor their ancestors. Others note that the language and form of the runes match 14th century styles with uncanny accuracy, too sophisticated perhaps for a farmer with no formal training. After endless tests, the Kensington Stone still hovers between archaeology and legend, too plausible to reject, too improbable to confirm. Far to the southwest, the Los Lunas Decalogue Stone in New Mexico raises another question. On its dark basalt surface are 10 long lines of inscription that resemble ancient Hebrew, arranged in the form of the 10 Commandments. Some have claimed it to be the work of early Israelites or Phoenicians, Mediterranean seafarers who may have crossed the ocean carrying the words of their God inscribed in stone. Most archaeologists disagree, suggesting it could be the work of later settlers or mere coincidence. Yet the parallels persist. Across the continent, echoes multiply. In Oklahoma, the Heavener runestone bears Old Norse characters. In West Virginia, an unclassified inscription remains undeciphered. In southern Canada, geometric carvings etched deep into granite align eerily with constellations, like a stellar map drawn for the gods. To the native peoples, such stones were not foreign curiosities. Their legends speak of strangers who carved signs upon the rocks and followed the sun. In certain Algonquian tongues, the word for those who came from the sea carries not a geographic but a sacred meaning. Visitors from another world, not invaders, but messengers. Perhaps these carvings were not marks of conquest at all, but memories of meeting, of the first moment when two lines of human memory crossed. Across many ancient cultures, carving in stone was the most sacred act imaginable. Stone does not burn, drift, or decay. It is how humankind speaks to eternity. Whoever made these marks, be they Norse, Phoenician, or from a civilization yet unnamed, may have wanted only one thing: to be remembered. And when the markings are traced together, from Minnesota to New Mexico, from the Appalachians to the Great Lakes, a faint pattern begins to emerge, as if outlining the map of a forgotten network. Trade routes of copper and shell, paths of exchange and myth. A corridor once called the Copper Route, the ancient highway linking the heart of North America to those who came from the sea, where commerce and legend once flowed together like water and light. From the wind-swept hills north of Lake Superior, where the water gleams like molten metal, ancient peoples once discovered a miraculous substance, native copper, one of the few metals on Earth found in pure form, unbound by ore, needing no fire to be shaped. Thousands of years ago, the inhabitants around the Great Lakes hammered, carved, and polished that red metal into spears, blades, bracelets, and sacred ornaments. It was more than a tool. It was the metal of the spirit, shining at the crossroads of earth, fire, and water. On the Keweenaw Peninsula and Isle Royale, archaeologists have uncovered tens of thousands of prehistoric mines, some dating back more than 5,000 years. Stone hammers, broken veins of ore, and deep extraction pits reveal that millions of tons of copper were once taken from the ground. Yet only a fraction of that copper appears in Native American artifacts, nowhere near enough to account for what was mined. Most of it, somehow, is gone. And from that absence was born one of history's most provocative theories, the Copper Route, an ancient transoceanic trade network that may have linked two worlds long before Columbus. Supporters of this idea point to the Bronze Age, between 3,000 and 1,200 years before Christ, when Egypt and Mesopotamia reached their peak. The demand for copper in the ancient Near East far exceeded local supply. Strangely, the copper from the Great Lakes matches the chemical purity and isotopic balance of some artifacts from the Mediterranean. Could it be that millennia before the age of sail, a sea highway crossed the Atlantic, where copper was exchanged for gold, salt, or sacred goods? The Phoenicians, masters of ancient navigation, are often named in this hypothesis. They had already sailed beyond the Strait of Gibraltar and along the west coast of Africa. If they had ever heard tales of a land to the west of the setting sun, where copper lay close to the surface, might they have dared to go further? Some imagine they reached the shores of Canada or New England, mining copper, trading with the local peoples, and returning east with ships filled with gleaming treasure. No proof exists, and yet no evidence fully denies it either. Only the faint ripples of geology and legend remain. The Ojibwe who still live near Lake Superior tell stories of people who came from the sea with light hair and skin like stone, arriving in boats with wings. They spoke no known language, traded metal and shells, and vanished again into the mist. The tribe called them the people of the setting sun. Perhaps it was only a metaphor, or perhaps the echo of a real encounter passed through so many generations that it became myth. Modern isotope studies now suggest that Great Lakes copper is distinct from that of the Near East, leading many scientists to reject the idea of transatlantic trade. Yet the question lingers, if it was not carried away, where did those millions of tons of copper go? No caches have been found, no signs of recycling, no evidence that local cultures used it in such vast quantity. It seems as if part of it simply vanished, as though someone once came, took what they needed, and left forever. Some geographers propose a natural route. From Keweenaw Peninsula, ancient traders could have followed the Mississippi southward to the Gulf of Mexico, then ridden the Gulf Stream across the Atlantic. That warm ocean current, cutting like a glowing ribbon through the cold sea, could easily have carried ships, cargo, and stories across worlds. If so, the ocean did not divide civilizations, it connected them in the rhythm of water and wind. And perhaps it is from those same currents, where trade, legend, and memory intertwine, that one ancient name still resonates through time: Atlantis. Not merely a lost city, but a metaphor for the collective memory of a world once joined, before the ocean rose to separate everything we thought was apart. The name Atlantis, the legendary realm described by Plato, has long stood as a symbol for all that humankind has lost, a radiant civilization destroyed, a memory of an age when mortals still walked close to the gods. Yet few notice that the shadow of Atlantis stretches far beyond the Mediterranean. It reaches across the ocean, echoing through the ancient legends and sacred symbols of the Americas. Plato wrote that Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, outside the Strait of Gibraltar, a continent greater than Libya and Asia Minor combined, whose people possessed abundant gold, copper, and tin, and whose city was built in concentric rings of land and water. Then, in a single night and day of catastrophe, the entire land sank beneath the sea. Although Plato may have meant it as an allegory of moral decay and the corruption of power, the story feels too vivid, too precise, as if he were describing something humanity once remembered, not merely imagined. And when European sailors first crossed the Atlantic, many believed that the world beyond the waves was the very place where Atlantis had once been. But there is another line of thought, that North America itself may be the surviving remnant of that sunken world. In the 19th century, scholars such as Ignatius Donnelly proposed that the great American civilizations, the Maya, the Inca, the Mississippian, were descended from the survivors of Atlantis. When their homeland drowned, they sailed across the ocean, carrying with them knowledge of astronomy, architecture, and sacred ritual. They reached the Yucatan, then followed the Mississippi deep into the continent, planting the seeds of order, of earthen pyramids, of solar worship, the same symbols that still shimmer through their descendants' heritage today. Though no archaeological evidence supports that claim, it reflects a deeper intuition that all civilizations may rise from a shared memory, then vanish, leaving only faint trails in myth. Curiously, many Native American stories also speak of lands swallowed by the sea. The Hopi tell of 4 worlds, 3 destroyed by water, fire, and ice. The Choctaw speak of the land the ocean reclaimed when people forgot the teachings of the sun. The Cherokee remember those who could fly, who once lived upon lands now beneath the waves. different tongues, different faiths, yet one echo. Water once took back what the earth had given. When archaeologists found submerged formations beneath the Gulf of Mexico, aligned stone blocks and stair-like terraces buried in silt, the world was reminded of Atlantis again. Some believe these are the remnants of a civilization drowned during the Great Cataclysm at the end of the Ice Age, around 12,000 years ago, coinciding with the Younger Dryas, a sudden global freeze that melted glaciers, raised sea levels by over 100 meters, and erased countless coastal worlds. If Atlantis truly existed, perhaps it vanished with that upheaval, yet its memory of balance, of light, of harmony between humanity and nature may still resonate, whispering through rituals and social orders built around the sun and flowing water. Perhaps Atlantis is not beneath the sea at all, but within the collective memory of humankind, a symbol of the eternal longing to reconnect what has been divided. Man and nature, individual and community, present and past. And millennia later, among the northern forests of New York, where the Hudson River meets Lake Ontario, a new order would rise, humble yet profound, one that would forever change how humanity understood itself. It was not an empire, it was not a kingdom, it was a union, a great alliance of peoples who called themselves Haudenosaunee, the people of the Longhouse. That Longhouse was more than a shelter. It was a philosophy, many nations living under one roof, distinct yet united, debating without destroying, bound together by dialogue rather than domination. From 5 great nations, the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca, emerged the Iroquois Confederacy, one of the oldest functioning democracies on earth. Power here did not rest in a single ruler, but in the voice of a council. Every important decision required consensus after long discussion, and women, especially the clan mothers, held the authority to choose and depose the male chiefs. According to Iroquois oral tradition, this confederacy was born not from conquest, but from a message of peace. Long ago, the land was torn by endless tribal warfare. Battles fought over honor, hunting, and revenge. Then came a man known as the peacemaker, a messenger of balance. He carried not weapons but symbols, an ear of corn, a fish, and a bundle of arrows tied together, representing sustenance, life, and strength in unity. Beside him traveled Hiawatha, a man once broken by loss who became the voice of compassion. Together they journeyed from village to village, preaching the great law of peace. One by one the nations listened. The Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca buried their weapons beneath a great white pine tree so that its roots might spread in all directions, a sign that peace would take hold deep within the earth. From that moment, the tree of great peace became the living spirit of the Confederacy. Later, a 6th nation, the Tuscarora, joined the Union, forming what would be known as the 6 Nations, a network of stability and cooperation that shaped the political landscape of northeastern North America for centuries. Their political structure was astonishingly sophisticated. Each nation maintained its own council of elders and family representatives. From these, chosen leaders, called sachems, were sent to the Central Council of the Confederacy. There, every matter was debated until unanimous agreement was reached. There were no votes, no majorities. No one wins, no one loses, they said. If someone loses, peace is lost. It made decisions slow, but enduring. Once a consensus was reached, it could stand for generations. Equally remarkable was their matrilineal system. Lineage passed through the mother, and women held the power to appoint and remove chiefs. The clan mothers preserved memory, mediated disputes, and ensured that leadership remained accountable to the people. In Iroquois society, women were not on the margins. They were the roots of authority, the keepers of balance. The great law of peace was more than a constitution, it was a philosophy of life. It rested on three pillars: peace, equality, and wisdom. Peace was the foundation, equality ensured that every voice was heard, wisdom demanded that every decision be made with foresight for the benefit of the seventh generation to come. This 7 generations principle still echoes today. Make every choice as though your descendants 7 generations hence will live with its consequences. It is a vision of responsibility linking people to land and present to future. To the Iroquois, democracy was not the right to speak louder than others. It was the duty to listen deeply. Every decision was a harmony of many voices, and if one instrument was out of tune, the whole song was wrong. True unity, they believed, did not mean thinking alike, but respecting difference within shared rhythm. Even today, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy endures, not as a state, but as a living spirit. Councils are still held. The great law of peace is still recited aloud, not written down, as it was in the beginning. And before every council, the same ancient thanksgiving is spoken. We give thanks to Mother Earth, to the waters, to the winds, to the fires, to those who came before, and to those yet unborn. It is more than a ritual. It is a declaration of civilization itself, a reminder that no democracy can survive without gratitude to the land beneath and to the time that sustains it. On a misty morning in 1497, as John Cabot's ship drifted into the cold northern waters off Newfoundland, English sailors wrote in their logs that they had sighted a vast, empty, uninhabited land. Thousands of miles to the south, when Christopher Columbus stepped ashore on a Caribbean island and raised his cross, he too believed he had discovered a terra nullius, a land belonging to no one. But they were wrong. This was not empty land. It was a living world, remembered, tended, and loved for tens of thousands of years. They simply did not know how to see it. When Europeans arrived, they carried not only sails, but an entire ideology. In their vision, land was wealth, people were labor, and history began only when written down. The oak forests, the maize fields, the ceremonial mounds, all were seen merely as nature. They did not understand that the forests were burned seasonally to renew life, that the grasslands were maintained through cyclical harvests, that rivers were the veins of living communities. To them, a world without kings or writing was wilderness, and so in a landscape of profound ecological order, they saw only emptiness. The earliest Spanish and French chronicles are filled with astonishment. They wrote of cities of earth, of people who worshipped the sun, of cornfields aligned as neatly as those of Europe. Yet instead of recognizing an independently advanced civilization, they named the inhabitants noble savages, a phrase that praised while erasing, admiring while denying. They romanticized their purity, then set out to civilize them, to teach them how to be human. For the indigenous peoples, that moment was like a cold wind sweeping through their world. They saw the white sails rising from the horizon like giant birds carrying strange light. They welcomed the newcomers with gifts, corn, fish, and water. In their languages, the word for stranger often meant brother, for all souls were believed to be born of the same earth. But their gift was misunderstood. To the Europeans, a gift was a transfer of ownership. To the indigenous, it was a sharing of life. Two worlds met, but they spoke entirely different languages, one of hospitality, the other of dominion. From that point forward, the conflict was no longer about territory, but about the meaning of existence itself. The Europeans built forts, planted flags, and renamed the land, each act a way of rewriting the world. The indigenous peoples looked upon these new maps and understood the newcomers had not come to live with them, but to live instead of them. Names like El Dorado, New World, and Nouvelle France began to cover lands that already had names, spirits, and memories. To the native peoples, land could never belong to anyone, because they were part of the land, not its owners. The New World, therefore, was never new. It was an ancient memory misread by foreign eyes. Yet that misunderstanding would ignite a chain of upheavals no one could foresee. The spread of disease, the flood of migration, and the erasure of memory. They were the shadows gathering behind the white sails, the darkness that followed the dawn. Before the great battles, before the broken treaties, before the forests were cut down, death had already arrived. It came not with swords or uniforms or royal decrees, but in breath, in wind, in the warmth of a shared blanket. Within a single century of first contact, over 90% of North America's indigenous population vanished, not by war, but by disease. It was an apocalypse without thunder, a massacre without soldiers, yet it changed the soul of the continent forever. The Europeans brought with them things invisible but deadly: smallpox, measles, influenza, typhus, malaria. To immune systems that had never met such invaders, these diseases spread like wildfire through dry grass. One sick traveler could infect an entire village within days. When the first expeditions moved on, they left behind silence, empty homes, untended fields, entire nations erased before anyone could even name the catastrophe. Many lands the colonists later claimed as uninhabited were, in truth, open-air cemeteries. Smallpox, and the empire's invisible weapon, struck first. It came north with the Spaniards from Mexico, then drifted east with French and English traders along the Mississippi and St. Lawrence rivers. Missionaries recorded scenes too terrible to describe. Their faces swelled, their skin blistered like coals, their eyes went blind, they died without recognizing one another. In many tongues, smallpox was called the sky's sorrow, for they could not understand why their gods had turned against them. So many died that there were none left to bury the rest. Villages were reclaimed by the forest, trails disappeared under new grass, and rivers swallowed canoes left to drift. When the English arrived in New England a century later, they wrote with wonder, "The land is rich and empty, as if nature herself prepared it for us." They did not know, or refused to know, that it was disease, not providence, that had cleared their way. For indigenous peoples, the plagues were not only medical disasters, they were spiritual collapses, when the sick could no longer attend ceremonies, when the storytellers fell silent, when no one remained to sing the songs that called the rain, society itself began to crumble. In their cultures, every role, healer, drummer, keeper of tales, was sacred. When they died, not only lives ended, but memories too. Ancient stories tell of souls of the sick wandering, unable to find their way home. Shamans lit sage and sweetgrass, singing the old songs to guide them back to Mother Earth. But eventually even the healers succumbed. The fires went out. The songs stopped. Silence spread. Spanish chronicles describe once dense regions of the southeast, filled with thriving fields and earthen cities that turned to wilderness within 2 generations. When Hernando de Soto marched through the Mississippi Valley in 1541, he saw cultivated fields, plazas, and ceremonial mounds. A century later, French explorers found only forest and soil-covered ruins, the ghostly outlines of civilizations mistaken for natural hills. In that silence, nature returned. Trees reclaimed houses, deer and wolves walked forgotten roads. Modern scientists believe the population collapse was so vast it reduced global carbon dioxide, cooling the planet slightly, a tragic contribution to Europe's little ice age. Proof, perhaps, that humanity and Earth breathe the same air. When one civilization dies, even the atmosphere mourns. To the Europeans, the plague was God's will, a divine sign that the land was theirs to take. But to the native peoples, it was the betrayal of faith itself. They had welcomed strangers as kin, and now the same hands that had offered food were burying the dead. In many indigenous languages, there is no word for epidemic. They simply said, "The earth is grieving." After the plagues had passed, when the land stood empty and villages had turned to ash, a second storm arrived, quieter, yet far more ruthless. It did not burn forests, it burned memory. It did not kill with fire, it killed with words. Its name was civilization. And under its banner, Europe began one of the most systematic acts of cultural destruction in human history. It began with an idea that sounded almost kind: to civilize. As Christian churches and imperial powers expanded westward, they sought not only to claim land, but to reshape souls. They believed the wild spirit of indigenous peoples needed salvation. But in the process of saving, they erased entire worlds. Languages, beliefs, music, stories, peeled away layer by layer, breath by breath. Children were taken from their parents and sent to boarding schools run by churches and governments. Their hair was cut, their clothes replaced, their names rewritten. Wovoka became William. Chenoa became Mary. Names that carried the voices of ancestors were erased from the roll calls. "Kill the Indian in him and save the man," read an actual motto of those schools. And with every classroom lesson, a piece of culture died. Language, the heartbeat of memory, was banned outright. Any child caught speaking their mother tongue was beaten, locked away, or forced to kneel for hours. Within a single generation, hundreds of languages disappeared. Languages that once had 10 different words for the wind that could name the scent of rain or the sadness of the soil, all silenced. Every time a storyteller died unheard, an invisible library collapsed. Adults were forced to abandon their faiths. The sun dance, the rain ceremony, the ghost dance, outlawed as pagan. Sacred statues were smashed, drums were burned, and holy landscapes were renamed after Christian saints. Black Hills became Mount Rushmore, where the faces of 4 presidents were carved into the sacred heart of the Lakota's Mother Earth. To the world, it was a symbol of patriotism. To them, it was the wound of the earth itself. Then came the Indian removal acts of the 19th century, the final blow that tore people from their sacred geography. Hundreds of tribes were forced to march thousands of miles to dry, desolate lands called reservations, far from water, far from memory. Tens of thousands died from hunger, cold, and exhaustion. The survivors called it the Trail of Tears. Children born on that march grew up without knowing what the word home meant. And when they came of age, they no longer spoke the language of their grandparents. A civilization had been uprooted from its soil, and there is no pain deeper than that. Meanwhile, churches rose upon holy ground, chapels were built atop burial mounds, crosses replaced stone circles, agricultural festivals were renamed as saints' days, ancient stories were baptized, rewritten to fit the Bible. The Great Spirit, once the divine presence that lived within all things, was replaced by a distant, singular God who ruled from above and judged from afar. To the indigenous, this was not conversion. It was the loss of their very voice to name the world. By the 20th century, the United States and Canada had legalized this erasure. Reservations became instruments of control. Indigenous peoples could not leave without written permission, could not hunt on ancestral land, could not hold ceremonies without government approval. Everything that once defined them, Their way of living, their way of thinking, their way of telling stories was fenced in with barbed wire. An anthropologist once wrote, "When I entered the reservation, I did not find wilderness. I found silence. The kind of silence that follows after memory has been buried alive." The 21st century began not only with technology, but with memory being restored. Beneath the quiet soil of North America, the past is rising again, no longer through legend, but through radar light, isotopic data, and strands of ancient DNA. After centuries of being dismissed as wilderness, science is now confirming what indigenous peoples never forgot, that this was once a world of order, intellect, and spirit. From the skies, electronic eyes, LIDAR, sweep over forests and plains, revealing circles, plazas, and ceremonial axes hidden for centuries beneath the earth. Under Illinois, networks of straight lines and concentric mounds show that Cahokia was not merely a large village, but a carefully planned city aligned with the cosmos, its avenues synchronized with the cycles of the sun. In Louisiana, Poverty Point emerges in satellite images as a series of concentric earthen rings, proof that 3,000 years ago the peoples of the Americas were already organizing space like engineers of both earth and heaven. New tools, isotopic analysis, ancient DNA sequencing, multispectral imaging, are redrawing the map of civilization. From Ohio to Alabama, hundreds of earthworks once blurred by farming have been digitally restored, revealing astronomical precision down to a single degree. Beneath moss in northern Canada, traces of round houses and copper artifacts uncover a network of technology and trade stretching thousands of miles. The entire continent, once thought fragmented, is reconnecting, as if Earth's own memory was sketching itself anew. Yet the most extraordinary rediscovery does not come from machines, but from the meeting of two ways of remembering. When archaeologists announce a new radiocarbon date, indigenous elders often smile. Our ancestors told that story long ago. To them, science has not discovered anything. It has merely caught up to memory. With every site that receives a new name, a corresponding song is sung, a reminder that archaeology does not unearth the past, it verifies the faith of the land. Because of this renewal, long-forgotten centers are entering the world's heritage once again. Cahokia and Poverty Point are now UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Etowah and Moundville have become research and cultural centers. The ceremonies of the sun, the once silenced languages, are being taught again in schools. Songs once buried in dust now echo across excavation sites. Science, once the instrument of conquest, has become a way of returning, of listening to what the earth has been saying all along. Ancient DNA studies have gone even further, revealing that the indigenous peoples of North America were never late arrivals, but a continuous lineage stretching back at least 15,000 years. Unbroken, rooted. They did not appear in history, they are history. That realization forces the world to reconsider civilization itself, not as something built from marble or metal, but as a balance between human and nature, a wisdom that modern science is only now learning again from them. And when the last layer of soil is lifted, when sunlight spills across the sacred mounds, one truth becomes clear: nothing is ever truly lost, only forgotten. The rediscovery, then, is not merely an excavation of artifacts, but an excavation of human memory. It reminds us that the past is never gone. It still breathes in the soil, whispers through the wind that passes over the old mounds, waiting for someone who knows how to listen.